Welcome to DEFN, episode number 26. We have been a bit slow in producing the episodes. These days we've been busy. I changed my jobs, and Ray is also busy with his new job. But finally, we got the speaker, or the host or the guest that we were waiting for a long time. We have David Nolen.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, David.
Hello, David.
How's it going?
It's going pretty good. Welcome to DEFN.
Really good.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot for joining us, because we did speak with you at Euroclosure in Bratislava. That was just quick 15-minute chat. I don't think you were speaking at that conference at that time, right?
No, I did speak at Bratislava. I did.
Oh, maybe I see you in so many places, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm getting confused. Okay, so first of all, the most important question: do you use Emacs?
I do use Emacs. I don't use it that much for Clojure programming, but I use IntelliJ and Cursive now. But I still use Emacs for org mode. And then, of course, a lot of people in the sort of Clojure community use Emacs, and so I often will, if I have some tooling thing that I think is cool, I'll figure out how to do it in Emacs. So a lot of the things that I do work in either Emacs or Cursive, and intentionally so.
Well, you bridge the gap between me and VJ then, because he's an Emacs guy and I'm a Cursive guy. So, if you can be the guys, if you can be on one side of a tooling or another side, we're going to talk about being on one side or another side to do with politics as well, won't we? I mean, I guess if an IDE can be politics, then anything can be. So I was going to open it up a little bit, was talking about these people in front of the Senate this week who were, defending themselves against Al Franken, which is a bizarre concept in many ways, that Facebook lawyers and Google lawyers and Twitter lawyers need to defend themselves against an ex-comedian. But they were essentially admitting that their tech was used to essentially, send out foul messages to the electorate in America last November. And that they were really going to be, it was very difficult for them to detect these foreign actors, although, paying in rubles and coming from Russia and doing political adverts apparently wasn't a good enough signal for them. So the question really was, is tech political? I mean, I think it is. I think you think it is. Maybe VJ thinks it is. I don't know. Maybe we could just start with that one.
I mean, I just don't see how it could not be. I mean, tech influences everybody's lives, and it's only having a greater and greater influence. I definitely think that the situation with Facebook, Twitter, and these other social networks has shown that people get information from very different places than traditional media now, enough so that you can have an impact. And those channels are not nearly as regulated as traditional media. I actually come from a radio, television, film background, and so when I went to school for that, of course, we talk a lot about the history and why regulations were put into place and all this stuff. And certainly, there's always somebody looking to make a buck, right? Some of the regulations, somebody wants to make a buck, but then I think that there is a significant amount of regulation that is also about that is in the public interest, and I don't think we have that. Things have changed so quickly with social media. I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but I definitely think that we've seen at least one effect from having a very different way for people to get information that isn't nearly as regulated as other channels in the past.
Yeah, I saw this. There's a book by Cathy O'Neill called "Weapons of Math Destruction," which is a beautiful title, if nothing else, And her argument is that actually the problem with social media and in general and these ML environments in general is that the algorithms themselves are not even explicable by the people that write them. So one of the problems that we have is that we need to be able to be transparent about the production of these algorithms, so that if there were any regulations, if there are any discrepancies, if there are any problems, if these algorithms surface some bias, and we've seen that. There's another lady called Joy Buolamwini who does research at MIT about bias in algorithms, and she's got a group called I think it's called the Algorithmic Justice League that is about saying how do we get these algorithms to be made more transparent. And I think that, like most regulations, I think transparency is often a key to these things.
I mean, that's true. I definitely think, technology definitely has this problem, which, technology is neutral only in the abstract. The problem is that technology by itself is inert. It's people's use of technology that often introduces the problems. You design an algorithm and, a lot of times bad stuff happens, not because anybody's malicious, just because they have a certain viewpoint about the world, and that gets encoded into an algorithm, and they don't really mean to mess everybody up. But when you deploy that to 10 million customers, your decisions have a pretty big impact.
I think the classic one was Microsoft, wasn't it? Recently, you put this bot out there, and that bot suddenly started spouting racist, fascist. Well, started shouting or tweeting Nazi stuff within 24 hours. It was the population went onto it and started training it basically to repeat Nazi sentiments. So it was very easy to show that these algorithms were dumb basically.
Well, and I would say it's not so much the algorithms are dumb. It's that when people decide to put something out like that, you would have thought that, okay, let's talk to people who have some background in the humanities or ethics, or who could who could have easily told you that, or even somebody who had a passing background in game theory, they could have predicted what was going to happen.
You can't expect that from a multi-billion-dollar company like Microsoft, David. I mean, come on, be fair.
But I think that's often the issue. You often people don't think of, I definitely think in the future, I think software engineers will have to consider themselves to also be, in some sense, citizens of whatever state they belong to, and that the decisions matter. And you're really not in a vacuum. I mean, it's like before we were doing tech, if you were an engineer and, you have to make decisions. Yeah, you have to feed your family and whatever. But maybe your job is to make bombs, and you have to decide: is that how you want to make your money?
Yeah. Building gas ovens was very popular at one point, but it seems to have gone out of business now.
And all my point there is that everybody has their own calculus for this, but it's just, I think as software engineers we have to begin to realize that the question is much more like, is the thing that I'm doing going to have a negative effect on reality?
Yeah, that's an awesome point, actually. Yeah, I think I saw a talk by what's he called, the clean coding guy, Bob.
Yeah.
I can't remember his second name now. Anyway, clean code Uncle Bob. It's his first name, actually.
Yeah,
Uncle Bob.
His first name is Uncle. His second name is Bob. Yes.
Okay, because I saw him doing a talk about the software code of ethics thing. I think some of his things were a bit off, but I think in general, I think it's in the air, isn't it? I think you're right, David. It's in the air to have some kind of thought process about whether or not you're having a negative impact, and then likewise, what are you going to do about it? What are the choices that you can make?
Okay, so on that bombshell, let's get back to Clojure. Because
we're all making choices all the time, buddy.
Indeed. But I mean, this all because I see this one a bit more questions of morality and technology, as David was pointing out, is just a tool. So you don't know what you want to do with it, and whatever you do with it is reflecting your own morality, your own ethics, and all that sort of stuff. So, by the way,
if you're an employee of a company, though, then where do you stand in that situation? You're working for people, you're working with people. How do
Yeah,
you
but
judge?
that's the tricky part. But I don't want to go into that discussion too much because it might end up in whole discussion about the philosophical choices and all that stuff. And I think philosophical podcast is probably not in my zone. Just like I'm not a right wing intellectual, as somebody was pointing out on Twitter. I told them, dude, I'm not even an intellectual. What the fuck is right wing? I don't even know what that is. So I mean,
Well, I'm glad we've cleared that up at least. I mean, I think that is vital.
Exactly. Yeah. So and then they accused me of not using Emacs, and then I told them I had to send a screenshot of my, right now on my desktop what is there, which is basically Emacs. So that cleared everything up. So it doesn't matter because he uses Emacs, so he must be good. So at least for the internet. But anyway, so David, first, so I think we should on that philosophical note. So who is David? So this is where we need to come back to deeper questions.
How did you make your choices, David? Yeah.
How did you come to Clojure? How did you? Because I know you were working at NYT at some point.
Yeah, but that was so. Clojure was I was working for a startup, and the startup thing ended, and I decided to take like a 3-month sabbatical. This was like 2008. At that point, I was just like sort of like an independent consultant doing whatever software things came to me, and I was like interested in Lisp because I'd done Lisp for fun. Like in 2003, I did structure interpretation computer programs, SICP, and that seemed pretty cool, but nobody seemed to be using Lisp. And then around 2008, I was on Hacker News, and there was all this excitement about Common Lisp, and Paul Graham had this thing called Arc, and I played around with those, but they didn't do quite what I wanted. I couldn't really see myself doing actual work with that stuff. And then I found a website that had this thing called Clojure, and I'd done quite a bit of Java and JVM stuff, and I was like, let me see how long it takes me to get this up and running. Because I'd messed around with Common Lisp, like SPCL, and back in 2008, getting SPCL running was like a massive pain in the butt. And then I downloaded this jar, and in 5 seconds I had a REPL, and so I was like, okay, I'm going to use this. That was it. It was just I was just looking for a Lisp that seemed like I could actually maybe use it for something, like for work. That's how I encountered it. Clojure was just a hobby for me. I mean, I worked on some open source stuff, which people are probably aware of, like Core Match, Core Logic, and all this other stuff. Yeah. And while I was at the New York Times, ClojureScript got released, and I started contributing to that. And then I left the New York Times in 2014. I got hired by Cognitech to work on various things. I spent some time on Datomic. And then, of course, I was also hired to, basically spend a significant amount of time developing ClojureScript itself.
Yeah. So Lisp brought you to Clojure, and what made you stay? So what are the features that not just the features, but what is it about the language that made you stay and then take more and more effort and your time to spend on ClojureScript?
I mean, I was already pretty, because of a book like SICP sort of like gets you thinking functionally. Also, the nice thing about SICP is that it sort of shows you that languages are something that people built. They're not really like, programming languages they're not really mathematical constructions. I mean, this is something sort of like when I was a young programmer, I was like, they came down from the mountain on tablet, C++, and you think these committees were like formed by geniuses, but really it's just people. They're choosing some semantics, and then of course they're making a programming language for the real world, and anything that has to touch the real world is a big mess. So real programming languages are just big messes. And SICP was like kind of eye-opening for me, because it was like, oh, with Scheme you can do object-oriented programming, you can do functional, you can do logical programming, logic programming, and it just showed me that with a very tiny core, Lisp had all this sort of expressiveness that you needed to do whatever you wanted. And so that was very exciting to me. And so I would say that's definitely what that Clojure had that part of Lisp that I liked, which was it's a fairly small core and it's very malleable. But really what kept me going was just that, to be honest, Clojure ran on stuff, and I could see myself using it. Right? I was like, the JVM's not going anywhere, and then with ClojureScript, JavaScript's not going anywhere. So I mean, I could use a language with its own runtime, but it just doesn't seem practical if I want to use a fairly cutting edge programming language, yet at the same time I want to get stuff done. I think Clojure is still totally owns that sweet spot. I haven't found anything else that is both interesting as a programming language, and yet at the same time I can just do real work with it and use very popular technologies without really, making a mess.
I think actually, I mean, this is the point you made there about getting started in 5 minutes. I think, as I mentioned to you, pre-show, if we can call it that, in the green room, is that I've started to do some ClojureScript as well myself recently, and I found it honestly a couple of years ago it wasn't a 5 minute minute thing to start out, but really these days it pretty much is. It really is. You just download a few bits and pieces, you follow the reframe README, or you follow some other READMEs, and bam, you're off. And I've been using it in the browser. I've also used it with Node.js and the CLI, and it's been pretty sweet. It's been really sweet to get started and to make stuff happen pretty quickly. So kudos to you and to the team that's made that happen. I think it's been really good. We're definitely, I think we, like you say, you started there with Clojure. It was 5 minutes to get started, and I think we're on parity now, if not even easier in some ways with ClojureScript, because you don't have to install a JVM anymore. So I really think it's it's at least there, if not better.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree. It took a long time, and a lot of that has to do with, I would definitely say when I mean, it's still the case that ClojureScript is mostly about reaching clients, and that's what most people are using it for. But I definitely think with the increasing interest in Node.js and the fact that we can bootstrap React Native, there's just all this stuff like, there's like somebody who there's a whole bash like shell now in Clojure which uses Lumo. I mean, people are going like I knew this, like when we did Bootstrap 2 years ago, I was like, this is going to be a thing which people are going to run with for a very long time, and it's more or less happened, right? People are really this is nothing. I don't work on that stuff, right? This is just This is just community effort and goodwill. It's really amazing to see all the stuff that people are building, whether it's tooling frameworks or these really cool self-hosted things.
Yeah. So before we get into all the libraries that you built, of course, discussion about Ohm and the other things about ClojureScript, I was wondering, have you ever played with different types of languages other than Clojure? Because there has been a lot of discussion these days about latest Richike's talk about static and dynamic thing coming back again. This seems like a holy war that goes on forever and ever, like VI and Emacs stuff. So did you play with any static languages, and what is your opinion on how Clojure sees the world compared to Haskell, for example?
I mean, the only languages, I would say we have to differentiate between like languages I've used in anger, which means I was angry at some point and I had to ship something, right? That's like there's like, it's so true. I mean, the languages that people hate and the languages that people use, right? That's just that's like a truism, right? But the only languages I used that had types that I actually had to use for work were things like Java or Objective-C or C++. So those are all like this sort of like nominal typing. You have to give it a name, and the names have to match. There's some annoying rules around inheritance and all this stuff. But and then of course Java has generics, which is like generics actually came from type functional programming. But I've never had to use type functional programming languages in anger. Whether I've dabbled in Haskell, Standard ML, OCaml. I've played around with them. They're neat, But at the same time, I mean, for me, those standard ML, OCaml, and Haskell are like non-starters because, again, I most of the stuff that I do is on the JVM, or I want to use JVM-based technologies. So there's no reason for me to use that stuff. The only other option would be something like Scala. But Scala's, and I think Scala is impressive, and they've done amazing work around that. It's very cool. But I'm happy with Clojure. I've never felt the need for. To me, like static typing is never a thing that I'm clamoring for. My experience so far in software development, and everybody's experience differs. I mean, it really depends on. That's the thing is people want to blame programming languages. They never want to blame themselves, right?
Obviously, that's a good craftsman always blames the
politics all
tools.
over again.
Yeah. Software engineers never want to blame themselves, or they don't want to blame the management, or just like all the things that actually make software projects fail. Which I guarantee you, it's not usually the programming language. It's whether there's a good testing methodology, whether you've thought about failure modes and continuous integration, and when it comes to UI stuff, where I've seen tons of messes in every friggin' programming language, there does not exist a programming language where you cannot make a mess when you do UI work. UIs are inherently like they involve a lot of incidental complexity because generally for any non-trivial UI. You just need to at least be able to model sort of complicated states. And my experience is that the biggest messes in a code base it's just bad designs. And no amount of compile time checking is going to fix your horrible design, right? You can make a mess even with all your compile time checks. And I don't really, there are a lot of people that, are like encode more stuff, and I'm just like, it doesn't seem, as far as I can tell, I've seen no evidence that this actually works at scale for UI work, which is, again, that's where most of my focus has been, and that's where I've seen things get really hairy. I've never seen any evidence that stuff matters for that type of work. And then I'm not convinced that, to me, often when I see people do lots of crazy type stuff, I'm like, it just feels like over engineering in Java. When you're in a Java type base with checked exceptions and rampant use of generics, and you're like, this sucks. Well, it's the same thing. It's just an over engineered mess. So I don't know. I
was going to say
all I'm saying is it's just my experience, and I've never had a convincing experience with this stuff.
I think the people on the UI side that are probably the best arguers for types, and it's the only really proper people I've seen arguing for types on the UI side are the people who are doing game programs who want to have the compiler to do lots and lots of optimizations for them to get the best possible raw performance from the hardware. And those game guys really want to exploit the low-level C and C, even C actually in assembler sometimes, which is not typed obviously, but
it's true. But there you're talking about something which is it's this other thing that people like types for, which is having access to primitives, whether that's numerical primitives or some sort of machine representation. Certainly with languages like Haskell, if you have the type of information, you can eliminate boxing and all this stuff. So I think that's a compelling argument. If just getting every last inch of performance, that might be a case for it. But the truth is that there's all these best-selling games on iOS, and they write that stuff in Unity, right? Unity. And Unity's running on this crappy version of a C# compiler without all those fancy optimizations that Microsoft has done in the past 6 or 7 years or whatever it is. And people write perfectly fun games. So even then, it's like, what problem are you solving? And does that problem actually benefit from this programming language choice that you're making.
Actually,
it's the
go on, sorry, Vijay. Yeah.
I think it's the perspective, right? Because I remember this argument can be taken from both sides, because it's like, okay, probably this is attributed to Steve Jobs or some other internet folklore. It's like, if it is beautiful outside, is it beautiful inside? That's the question. So of course I can make an amazing application, but inside, does it conform to my sense of beauty or my sense of what a good program should look like? So for me, it feels like if you are coming from this mathematical background, that the world is like properly structured in a way, and then I'm going to represent it in much more mathematical sense, then you lean towards going to the statically typed languages or these kind of things. But of course, then again, you need to do a lot of workarounds to represent the real world, because this is something that when I was in school, they explained there are only 9 types of species, or 9 types that you divide, and then suddenly there is a 1 exception and 2 exceptions and 3 exceptions, and then the real world doesn't conform to your classification anymore, and then you need to invent new ways of representing it. So I was thinking it all depends on individual perspective. Some people see beauty in Lisp, some people see beauty in dynamism, and some people see it conforms to your perspective.
Absolutely. I definitely think that's true. I mean, I definitely think subjectivity plays into it, but at the same time, there's also something to be said where I also think that programmers are often blind to what causes issues in software. I recently spoke at ReactiveConf, and I revisited that paper by Ben Mosley and Peter Marks called Out of the Tar Pit. And that was written in 2006. And, he really points out that state, like unmanaged state, they point out, unmanaged state really just makes everything more complicated. And then, and a great case in point where people are like, there's no proof that React is better, but why did React take off? And people could say it's just marketing, but that's like bullshit. The reason React took off was because React is much more disciplined about state, right? So even though there's a learning curve, tens of thousands, if at this point not hundreds of thousands of JavaScript devs have looked. They were using jQuery, and then they used React, and they spent a week on it, and they realized, oh, if I do less stateful stuff, it's easier to understand what my program is doing. So that's so even though people had to experience it in order to determine that, and like I could never say, like if I said this 4 years ago, it's easier if you manage your state. Everybody would say, that's not true.
That's true.
And now after they use React, and they're like, and now they use React, and they're like, oh, it is true.
Yeah.
Right, but there's no proof, right? There's no proof. There's no mathematical proof, right? Because the world is messy. And it's only through experience that you realize, how do we manage the messiness of the real world? And that often doesn't bottom out in anything that I can prove to anybody.
Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it, the way that, jQuery didn't evolve because it was inherently a beautiful thing. It only became popular because the concept of browser DOMs was annoying. Basically it was a way to neutralize the browser wars from a JavaScript perspective. It was a way of doing CSS type queries.
But that's only partially true. So like if you actually understood jQuery, what did jQuery try to do? So jQuery did 2 things. One thing it did was tried to paper over all the incidental complexity of the differences, the arbitrary difference between browsers. That was just what it initially did. But in later, what it did was it allowed you to do less stateful things. It used to be, before you used jQuery, that if you wanted to have an event handler, you'd have to attach the event handler on every event, on every single thing that's clickable. And later they had this version of event delegation, because the problem is an event listener is stateful. You have to attach it, and then you have to remove it. And then if you blow away the DOM and you forgot, then you have a leak, right? So there's all this stateful stuff that
but the first version of jQuery did not use Clojure. It didn't use closures. It used a global state actually. that's the weird thing about jQuery. It was completely polluting the global state at the beginning.
It was, but my point is that even though people used it and they talked about these words, what it was doing for them was allowed them to add some state management that they didn't have before.
Yeah, but he actually discovered closures after Doug Crockford, I think, explained them to him or read the book, because his first version didn't have that kind of encapsulation that the later versions had. So it was definitely an accident, that it became popular through the DOM stuff, and then you're right. He definitely cleaned his act up, but that was like on the back of his previous success, I think. But it doesn't matter. What the fuck, Well, who cares? The point is that it was basically about, browser wars and then, like you say, managing state. But React wasn't it about the Facebook saying, well, we've got these complex apps now. We have really complicated apps that React needs to really be built for? No?
Not really. So React was created by one developer. One developer was this guy, Jordan Walk. He was working on a backbone app for one part of Facebook with, I think, maybe 2 other devs. It was a typical MVC app where you had stateful models, views, and controls. And he was coming from a functional background. He has a background in OCaml. And he was, I'm going to do this crazy idea where I do a virtual DOM thing, and I'm going to functionally update the DOM and create a functional API. React was actually, in its first year, not used at all at Facebook. Almost everybody at Facebook was like, that's just a weird thing. Let's open source it. Let's see what other people think. So React was not popular internally. Even React Native, when it came out, was very controversial. So this belief that Facebook had a unified front around React is just not true.
But they sell it themselves, actually. At their own conferences, they say React.js was actually a kind of spin-off from our general React concept. They say that at their conferences. I mean, maybe they're bullshitting. I can definitely believe that they're bullshitting. They say this,
but it's just not true. I know the people that developed it. It was one developer, and they struggled. They struggled to get uptake within the company.
Yeah, well, we need him before the Senate next time. Yeah. But yeah, okay, so that's fine. But it definitely was there to try and solve this problem of more complicated applications, wasn't it? It was to try and wrangle that state, like you say. Yeah. No?
I think not necessarily, because I think React actually has issues in more complicated applications. You need other abstractions. I mean, that's why people like Reframe, because Reframe gives you more tools than React does out of the box. But what React does is it solves one particular problem. It eliminates the stateful DOM. Semantically, you no longer have to think of the DOM as being stateful, and that is a massive simplification.
You can just use it declaratively.
Yeah.
So let's. I think we're talking about React, which is a nice segue to get into this. ClojureScript, essentially using React, because apart from Hoplon, I don't think there are many other ClojureScript driven things. So there was some discussion about how to use jQuery stuff at some point, but I think more or less at large the community has owned or adopted React to be our backend, so to speak, for the front end or middle end or whatever. What do you think of this trend? Because I remember you started this your blog post about React. That was the first look into this thing from ClojureScript as well. And then that snowballed into, I think, sort of like 20 or 30 React plugins or React frameworks using ClojureScript. So what is your opinion on these things? And where did you see Ohm, and then where do you see Ohm in the future in this landscape?
Initially it was just that React presents a functional API. So one thing that was missing for ClojureScript was that none of the UI things were very, very functional. jQuery is not functional. Backbone's not functional. Ember's not functional. Angular's not functional. Google Closure Library is not functional. None of these things were functional. React was the very first framework that was written for JavaScript people that we could adopt it, and it could be, and the integration could be very clean. Anybody that's used reagents it's like mind blowing, right? It's like I can write functions, and functions make the UI, right? And it's like it's just like, it's this beautiful world. I'm just writing plain old functions. and I get to see
Yeah,
stuff in the
yeah.
I get to see stuff in the browser. All the stuff that you don't want to know about, you don't have to know about. So to me, it's no wonder that it just blew up. Within 4 months, everybody in ClojureScript was using React. We were adopting React before JavaScript was adopting React.
Yeah.
Because
That's true.
for us, it was just so obvious. It was just the right way if you're coming from a functional standpoint. So I'm glad that it was obvious to the Clojure community. I'm happy to see so many different versions. I mean, to be honest, I don't really care about these. There's a bazillion of these integrations around React, and I think it's great. People want to do it however they want, as long as you're doing it that way. It's going to be better than whatever you were doing before. I did Ohm, and Ohm was, of course, an experiment. In the sense I didn't know exactly how it was supposed to work. There was an initial version which had this cursor thing, which actually that idea was adopted in JavaScript. You have people use Redux with cursors and all this stuff. And then I did Ohm Next, which was kind of a reaction to GraphQL, Relay, and Falcor, and these other JavaScript things. And then trying to think a bit about full stack dev, where there's a tighter integration between the front end and, say, a database like Datomic, which is like a functional database. But people use Ohm Next. I actually don't have that much time to work on it, but fortunately there's been some good devs. There's also been Tony K, which I believe was also on this show. And he's been working on
the last episode, yeah.
He's been working on Fulcro, which is really cool, which is very much in some sense, a much friendlier, cleaned up version of Ohm Next. And he's doing great stuff. And I think he has some new stuff that he probably is going to be doing, and you'll probably hear about that. But to be honest, when I made Ohm Next, it's great. I'm happy that people use it. I'm happy that people are having fun with it. But more important than using it is understanding why you might want to design a system in this way. And for example, I've worked on several client projects where, for various reasons, we didn't use Ohm Next, but we just adopted an Ohm Next architecture, right? We did the exact same thing. We had Datomic in the back end, we had queries in the front end, and it made for a radically simpler code base. The entire logic for talking in the back end in that system was maybe it was 200 lines of code, and we just had a bunch of declarative queries where we would do Datomic pull on whatever data that we needed, and it was great. It was one of the cleanest front end things I ever worked on in my life.
Nice. And where is Ohm Next going then? Where are you taking it to?
So there's nothing. People have asked that question. There's nothing. I have no new features in mind. There are some things about dynamic queries which people are talking about, which maybe we'll think about that, but I'm unlikely to tackle that anytime soon. Maybe in the near future, maybe some spec integration. Now that spec is starting to, it seems, probably in the next 6 months, at least, the current version is going to probably settle down. So, but excuse me, that's all I have in mind. I'm not. Okay. My experience was that Ohm Next does plenty. It does plenty. Yeah. I don't know that it needs to do more than what it currently does.
But do you think this ideas that Ohm Next has right now, with the GraphQL and with the way the UI is being built, is it what is the longevity of this one? Because I'm interested in where are you looking at, because that's what I really liked when you started Ohm. That was a completely different view on how to build the UIs. Obviously, you give talks about it, standing on the Jane's shoulders, etc. But still, because you have the visibility into the future, you're able to see this is how it should be. So, do you see any other experimental ideas that are going to come up in this direction?
I don't, but I'm also I also think I think it's going to probably take 3 or 4 years for people to even switch over to what I'm talking about. I do go to JavaScript conferences, and you see GraphQL is slowly but surely taking hold. I think it's really. I think this is already pretty radical, and it's a radical enough of a change, and it's in some sense it's a bit invasive because it requires buy-in from backend developers to change their thinking. Right? This is not a simple change. It's kind of like a holistic decision. So I think that that it's at least a few years. But I'm also convinced that it's basically the future. I think people that want to build simpler systems are going to basically be building GraphQL-like systems.
But isn't it something like, as you said, if you want to switch to GraphQL-based systems, then obviously you need to have the buy-in from the whole system. But isn't that the idea fundamentally REST was trying to stay away from? Like, you have this separation, and then we have this API, and then you let any kind of client talk to us. So how does it differ in terms of that kind of architecture?
I mean, it doesn't. I mean, REST to me is like, number one, I don't think REST is very important, and I definitely think that the way people design current APIs is just broken with respect to clients. There's not much good about it, and really, this is not just my opinion. This is the opinion of companies like Facebook and Netflix. There's all these people that are adopting this more flexible client-driven design because it removes complexity. It removes complexity from both the front and the back end because clients can request whatever they actually need, and then you don't really care about. You don't need all this time spent on pointless API design.
Yeah.
So you think it's a bit more like a type system versus a dynamic system in that respect, because there are some fundamentals in a graph. Obviously, you have to know what the edges are. You have to know what the relationships are. So there is some design going on there, isn't there?
But you have to know this anyway.
No, yeah, of course, yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely.
Like whenever you say that, you're like, well, I have to know what the REST response returns. I have to know what fields are there. I have to know what sub-entities are there. You already have to know that stuff. It's just that now I can friggin' describe it. I don't have to just eat whatever you give me.
Yeah. And you can limit it. That's the nice thing. I mean,
So I think people are sort of like, they're not being self-reflexive that it's already the case that REST forces you to think about all these things, but it's inflexible. It's inflexible.
I think there was another the thing that came up like on top of REST was this like JSON API, which allowed you to do thinning of the objects and also to do queries, and so I think that the REST. There was a compromise definitely in that sense around this JSON API, and I think Microsoft and Salesforce had this other thing. I'm blanking on it now, but it was a kind of queryable REST, as it were. I can't remember what it is now.
There's been quite a few things since GraphQL where people have come up with REST-like designs that are like GraphQL. And to me, it's like, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if it's GraphQL. It doesn't matter if it's Falcor. It doesn't matter if it's augmented REST. It's all the same thing. It's an architectural design. We're not talking about the concrete technology. The point is that clients need to be able to describe what they want. Who cares how you accomplish that?
Yeah. So what was the thing that you were talking about spec? What would apart from just saying the shape of the queries or the shape of the results, is there anything more deeper in spec that you're interested in exploring?
Not really. It was really just about there's a nice feature in React where you have this thing called props validation, where you can basically say the structure of the thing should look like this, and you get validation. And basically by adding specs, if you did something wrong, you would get a nice descriptive reason for why the values that were passed into a component aren't correct. It really was no more complicated than that.
That's plenty already, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Okay. So I'm going to move to the community questions because we tweeted out, Ask David thing, and then there were a lot of people asking about WebAssembly, like, okay, what about WebAssembly? And if someone built a GC for WebAssembly, could that be sufficient? Or are there any other blockers? I mean, and what is the future?
Well, number one, writing a GC in WebAssembly is like, first somebody would have to demonstrate that you can compete with the GC in
V8.
the existing JavaScript engines, which are at this point they are state of the art, right? They're very state of the art. I'm skeptical that you could compete. So there's a performance hit there. So that's really the big thing. It's like until somebody demonstrates otherwise, I don't think you can achieve the performance that's necessary. You have to also remember that the GCs in browsers, they interact non-trivially with the browser itself, right? Because generally there's some form of garbage collection for the DOM, and that's different from the one for the JavaScript engine. And the way these two things interact is non-trivial. And whatever decisions you make, they all affect latency. So I don't really see that going anywhere. That said, we'll see. I mean, there recently, what was more exciting to me than WebAssembly, to be honest, was a proposal by the WebKit team to add shared memory concurrency to JavaScript core. And I'm more excited about that because we already have written functional data structures that would work well for us, and we could then deliver all of Clojure's concurrency primitives in the browser. That to me is way more interesting than WASM, at least
that means
at
bringing
this point.
not just Atom, but other things as well.
Everything. I mean, the basically, what WebKit's proposing, it's like shared memory concurrency with locks and everything. So we could just we could just replicate all the other concurrency
stuff.
Exactly. That's right.
Okay. Nice.
So I would say WASM. We'll see.
Yeah.
Concurrency stuff more interesting.
Talking of concurrency,
so when is your next album coming out?
Just before we go on to his album.
Okay.
What about, I mean, because some of the things that are interesting in terms of concurrency are these web workers on the browser side. Is that something that you've thought about in terms of how we could make that a bit easier to exploit?
So web workers, they let you do a certain type of thing. So web workers are message passing only. You can't share data. They have this thing like this shared buffer thing, but it's really not that ideal, especially for ClojureScript. And then from a development perspective, it's really a bit annoying because you have to build your project for such a way so that you can reuse your code in the web worker and in the main page. So it's not, I would say it's not the most ideal thing. I mean, for some things it works, but it is not, for lots of things that you'd want to do, Clojure style concurrency, it doesn't solve that problem.
Right. Okay. So core async is just a better answer in general, at the moment, at least.
Yeah. I mean, for absolutely. If all you want is just, you want to be able to break up your work into asynchronous tasks, core async is great.
Sorry,
so
PJ.
there is no, it's okay. And then we still have plenty of questions,
Yeah.
So somebody was Q1, I think. So he was asking, if you couldn't write ClojureScript, what would you use?
If I couldn't write ClojureScript, I mean, most of the things that are out there. I mean, I follow the compile to JavaScript languages quite a bit. I mean, I think Elm is really cool. I think Reason looks like it's like it's getting some interest. Reason, which is the Facebook OCaml thing.
Yeah.
You've got Scala.js, which is coming along quite well. It's actually Scala.js is particularly impressive because it really feels like you have all of Scala, but you get to do browser dev, and it's come a long way. It's very impressive. But as far as what I would use, I mean, it's really I love ClojureScript. I've been working on ClojureScript for 6 years. I mean,
I think you can say that's why I built ClojureScript.
I mean, it's like, what would I use? I spent 6 years on this, so I don't have to use anything else.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
If someone took away ClojureScript, you would just write it. That's probably the best answer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I would have ended up writing ClojureScript anyway. So
Isn't it like this old story about that? Like every complicated language end up just writing an inferior version of Lisp. So just write a proper one instead. That's the answer. Yeah.
So let's see. What are your views on TDD?
I don't do TDD. I mean, I've never done TDD. I mean, I don't really think that it's that important. But I do like writing tests. And generally when I'm writing code, I'm writing tests. But I don't necessarily start with tests. I don't think that's a good way to start. I generally start with thinking about what I'm doing. And then I write some code, and the REPL actually helps a lot with like skipping trivial things that you would often write a test for if you're doing TDD. I think REPL-driven development really changes your approach. At the same time, testing is super important. I mean, I write tests. I just don't use that to drive dev.
I think I was asking about your album. When is your next album coming out?
Hopefully soon. I've been working on it for so long, like 2 years. I don't know.
Wow.
Hopefully soon. But things take forever.
Which one do you think is easier? I mean, producing software or producing music?
I think they both take a lot of time. Far more time than you would think.
Yeah, I agree. So there was another question about what I don't know if you've seen this already. What is your thought about Shadow CLJS?
Shadow CLJS, yeah. So that's the alternate build tool. It's quite cool. It's not. I mean, we don't contribute to it. Shadow CLJS just reuses the compiler part, and it has a lot of custom stuff, and it has an interesting integration for Node.js. If you're really excited about integrating with Webpack and you don't want to use JVM stuff, which I would argue it's not most people, so that's why I don't think that many people use Shadow. A lot of people are happy just sticking with the Clojure and JVM build stuff. But if you have a different set of goals and a different set of interests, then Shadow CLJS is quite cool. I'm happy to see that there are alternate build tools.
So do you say at some point Clojure and ClojureScript, of course there is this parity because of the concurrency stuff not being available on JavaScript or a disparity. But do you see that they're going to be united at some point, or do you think that ClojureScript will take its own path and then become its own language?
No, I mean we don't add stuff. I mean there's like a handful of things in ClojureScript that are different because there's a couple things you can do in JavaScript that we can't do on the JVM, and then there's like obvious stuff like hosty stuff which we're never going to reconcile, and we don't care about reconciling. Things like numerics, things like JavaScript prototypes versus Java classes, all that stuff. You can't. It's never going to change. So no, I don't. I mean, ClojureScript stays in sync with Clojure, right? So this is why we have the same version scheme. When we do our announcements, we announce what we've ported, what things we fixed that were different. I would say what we've done so far is probably how it's going to be. I mean, for many years, which is that we can't fix everything, but we can make it close enough that people are happy.
Yeah.
Well, one quick question for you there, David, is something that struck me a little bit because I've been doing a bit of Clojure and ClojureScript full stack, and one of the things that struck me is a little bit with the namespaces was you have to do these refer macro things. It seems a bit awkward to have to do that. Is that something which is potentially clean upable, or is that an intrinsic problem?
It's intrinsic because if you're not bootstrapped, then there's no compiler at runtime. So in Clojure, the Clojure, the reason you can start up a Clojure box on AWS and then make an SSH tunnel into it and then eval code is because that box is running the Clojure compiler. But we don't ship the compiler to web browsers, right? So that means macros run at compile time, and they can't exist at any other time. So that's why you have this distinction. For macros have to be handled specially because you're never going to have the compiler at runtime. That's and technically in Bootstrap you could fix this, but the way that we did Bootstrap, I intentionally discourage it by the way that Bootstrap works, so that when people write Bootstrap stuff, people are encouraged to write portable stuff. Right? We don't want a forked ecosystem. Right.
Yeah.
We want people to write code that works on the JVM and that works on JavaScript hosted things. We don't want there to be people to be relying on features that don't work everywhere. Right? That nobody wants that. Like you don't want that. So like you lose some convenience for macros, but the beauty is that you decide, oh, my client now wants to do a Node.js only thing. You can use all that code that you were using before. It's not going to be a problem. It's not going to be a problem.
Yeah. No, it was just this. Like the only reason I noticed it mostly because of core async actually is you have to refer certain parts of core async as macros and certain parts of core async as the namespace.
There's a ticket and a fix for that problem. Actually, that specific problem.
All right.
Somebody needs to like just look at it, test it, and then merge it in. So there's a fix for that issue.
All right. Okay. Right, back to the other questions then, VJ.
Yes.
I've got my answers.
So that was your consulting hour.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
You keep saying, I just started ClojureScript, so maybe it's better to have David as a guest, so I can just ask all the questions. Yeah. Like that's the best way to get get your project kickstarted.
Yeah.
I think David is going to send us an invoice for consulting work. But anyway, I think that those are pretty much the questions that we got from people and also from us as well. Is there anything that you would like to? You're going to be on at a conference, right? Which one? The next one?
Code Mesh.
Code Mesh. Okay.
Yeah.
Where is it? It's
leaving on tomorrow.
Okay. Where is it?
In London.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
Yeah.
And also, I see that Eric was also organizing a Clojure meetup, not meetup, but a conference.
Conference
right?
in New Orleans. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was on the show, and then we were discussing, and then he was trying to. He explained the idea behind it, and it was pretty exciting.
Yeah. I'm excited. I've never been to New Orleans, so I'm looking forward to it.
Nice. Okay. I think that's pretty much it from us. Ray, do you have anything?
The question, David, is there anything you wanted to discuss or share, or anything else that you wanted to we missed out on, or?
I can't think of anything. I think we covered a lot of the other questions. I mean, no, I think it's very exciting what's happening in ClojureScript. I mean, I would say that like if you told me that there'd be this much stuff happening around it, or it'd be used in so many different ways, I wouldn't have believed you. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting, and I think there's a lot more work to do. So even though there might not be like there's probably not going to be any big new features to announce, but I definitely think the next year or two is just going to be about making it easier to use, faster. Fix. There's still lots of bugs we want to fix. So just bringing the quality of the thing much pushing it up.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think it's a great ecosystem around ClojureScript now. I mean, all the fig wheel stuff and the reframe stuff, and like you say, all those other component frameworks around DataScript. There's so much really great stuff happening out there that knocks the socks off anything that is in an equivalent ecosystem on the UI. That's for sure. I'm really personally excited to be involved in it. Even as a consumer.
Yeah, but I mean that's to me the most exciting. Like, I mean, I'm using it right now at work, and seeing Clojure code in my browser, and like using Clojure in the browser, I'm like, this is amazing. I mean, I've been using it, for years, and I'm still as enthusiastic about it as when I started. So
perfect. So I think that's pretty much it. So maybe we can wrap up.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, David, for taking the time. And of course, all the hard work that you put in, and releasing it for open source and contributing your time and hours, and speaking at the conferences, and the way that you are sharing your ideas. It is very inspiring, and I'd like to personally thank you for all the Om stuff. And as well, these were like, I mean, sometimes it goes a lot, above my head, but still it takes some time to sink. As you said, it took some time for people to understand about the state and these kind of things. So we're really, really happy to have you on the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thanks for helping out Ray, so he can do his job now. Finally, he keeps bragging about, I'm a full stack Clojure developer, and now he can just tell people that, hey, I've been trained by David now.
Yes, exactly. I can cite you.
Let's just live up to his level. So I need to.
I've got 3 pages of an application and a small CLI application working, so not exactly a guru yet, but
once you finish another to do, we are done.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's the standard of
no,
things.
But honestly, David, I mean, it's been a long time of me getting into this stuff, but now I really feel it, and it just is so exciting to be using Clojure on the front end and on the Node side as well. I've done both things in JavaScript in the past. In other environments, and this new job is I've got more control over the technology myself, so I'm choosing to use these more leading edge technologies that we have at our hands, and but everyone's loving it. Everyone I speak to about it at work, they're all get very excited because it's just so clean. This is the moment. I mean, so
Google
pure,
Hangouts used to have these plugins to put the Halo or something on people's heads, and there's the moment, and David should click that button, and there's like Halo, and then.
Yeah, I mean that's actually, maybe before you wrap up, that's really, I think that's the real awesome thing about Clojure is that Clojure is really ClojureScript, and the ecosystem that's been built by the community. It's really now, I would say, it's an amazing ecosystem. You can really sit down and say, I want to build a whole system. I want to do back-end stuff. I want to do front-end stuff. And there's just a lot of amazing tools to get the job done. My mind is blown. It's cool that we're building the programming language stuff, but the fact that the community has made it extremely practical and fun, like not just practical, right? It's productive, but it's also really fun.
Yeah.
And it's been great to see the community really, fully realize the dream. So,
yeah.
Brilliant. Let's leave it on that. Superb. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks very much, David.
For this episode, and we plan to produce, of course, more episodes in the pipeline. We have 2 more guests lined up in the next couple of weeks. We'll announce it very shortly on Twitter who we're going to have on the show. I think we will continue on the ClojureScript theme with the next guest. So you need to wait, follow us on Twitter to know who is that going to be. And thanks again, David, for joining us. And right before we close this episode, we'd like to share something about some new initiative that we are taking. We started. Did we start it already, or did we created an account on Patreon?
It's there. We've started it.
That's pretty much what we've done so far. Yeah. We haven't done much about it yet, but the idea is to put the word out there, and if you like the show, you might want to support us. There are some non-significant costs associated with this one because we don't want to go for the sponsorships or anything. So we'd love to have your opinion about it, and we haven't decided what kind of perks that you're gonna get if you have Patreon. Obviously, maybe we'll release a FLAC audio or something so you can hear us in much more piercing quality in your ears, but probably that's not something that you're looking out for. So we'll put the links in the show description, and we'll also tweet about it. So it would be great to have some interaction with the people who are listening to this thing, and what you want us to focus on in the future. That's it from us. And Ray, any closing words?
Well, just to say again, thank you to David, and I think it's it's really great to have this opportunity. I think we're very honoured to have you on the show and to let you loose and talk about these great things because, it's a fantastic community. I'm benefiting from it, VJ is, and I think all listeners are as well. And I think it's just a pure pleasure to talk to you as well. Let's be honest, you're a great guy. So,
well, thanks again for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome stuff. Thank you very much.